announcing the commencement of the annual purge sanctioned by the U.S. government. Weapons of Class 4 and lower have been authorized for use during the purge. All other weapons are restricted. Government officials of ranking 10 have been granted immunity from the purge and shall not be harmed. Commencing at the siren, any and all crime, including murder, will be legal for 12 continuous hours. Police, fire, and emergency medical services will be unavailable until tomorrow morning at 7 a.m. when the purge concludes. Blessed be our new founding fathers and America, a nation reborn. May God be with you all.
Energy on the truck, boy.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to tonight's show with Grizzly and Psychic Ginette Lucas. How's everybody doing tonight? Ginette, how about you? How are you doing?
I'm here. I'm putting my hand up and waving.
All right. I see Angela's out there. I think we probably need to send Angela the link. I think she needs the link. She's asking out there in the chat room, is anyone here? So, yes.
Do I need to hang up and then send her a link?
Yeah, if you don't mind. Ladies and gentlemen, we're having a little bit of problems. We have Angela Ford returning back to the show tonight. Angela Ford, remember her? She's coming back on. She's actually bringing a guest. Dale Graff is actually coming back on the show tonight as well. It's going to be very interesting, so can't wait for that to happen. It's going to be awesome. We're going to get her on the show here in a second as well, so if you hang tight with us and everything, we'll see what we can do here and get that taken care of. Welcome back, everybody, to tonight's show. Make sure and email us at grizzlytruecrimes@gmail.com. That's grizzlytruecrimes@gmail.com. Hello, Doris. Welcome to the show. Please make sure and like us and subscribe to us. Love to hear from everybody, coast to coast and around the world. See if we can get them on the show here. So, yeah, Dale's supposed to be coming on. Okay, you did send him a link. Okay, here. We'll see if we can get him back on here. Absolutely here. A little music going here. Everybody should be jumping on here in a second. I do apologize about that, ladies and gentlemen. Get this taken care of here. So what's everybody been up to? I've been packing and moving the studio. Moving to northern Kentucky here, so that's been a interesting journey, I can say. Ginette, she's been busy, sick, and unfortunately, she's been feeling a lot better. Let's see here. I know she's been working on some hidden treasures, I think she was telling me. Let's see here. When are they going to pop up on my radar here? Now, I'm waiting, Angela. Let's see. Angela. So who else is out there paying attention to us right now? I do apologize about the delay here. Please email me the link. Okay. Let's see if I can get that taken care of again. Bear with me, ladies and gentlemen, here. Let's see here. See if we can send that link to them. Let's see here.
This is not a test. This is your emergency broadcast system announcing the commencement of the annual purge sanctioned by the U.S. government. Weapons of Class 4 and lower have been authorized for use during the purge. All other weapons are restricted. Government officials of ranking 10 have been granted immunity from the purge and shall not be harmed. Commencing at the siren, any...
Did she respond?
Am I in?
She's in.
Okay. Grizzly, you sent me a link several days ago, and I put that on, and I couldn't get in, and I gave Dale that link. So Dale needs the link that Ginette just sent me.
Okay, can you go to your email and forward it to him? Call him first, and say you're gonna send him the link again.
Yeah, because
No worries. Yeah, shoot away. We're good. We're waiting. I think can you hear me, Angela?
Yeah, we got the wrong link.
It happens. No worries. Okay. All right. Yay. I can't hear him. Can you hear him? Oh, there we go.
Mic meter. There we go, ladies and gentlemen. Angela will be right back. She is sending out the link to
Dale.
Mr.
Graff.
Dale. So,
Yep.
Absolutely.
Yeah, these things happen. It can be one day everything's perfect, and the next time it's not. And
So I was telling everybody you was working on a new treasure hunt or something, or
I am.
so,
I'm
so
working
tell
on
us about that.
So I'm working on some work in Nevada and Utah, and I'm gonna say not Jesse James, Butch Cassidy, and then I got some phone calls for some Texas projects, and which of course it's all fun. I mean, I'm not boots on the ground; they are. So I do the work from home, which is called remote dowsing or remote psychic work, and it. They haven't gotten their maps back, so they're just waiting on me to send back the maps. Um, right now, it looks like Texas, the weather, 1 minute it's fine, the next minute they have snow. So they're waiting for that to uh, stand by, I guess. I mean, go away. Then they're going to go out and go detect. On Nevada and Utah, there's no way they can go out for another month. So I just have to be patient. But I do think we're about to find some really good historical items. Again, most females are excited about the fact that you're touching something from someone from so many years ago, whereas men are like, "Ooh, what's it worth?" I mean, it's always nice to know what it's worth, but to me, it's just history in your hand, and it's really, to me, it's impacting, very impacting.
Right.
I mean, I do everything from estates to locating missing objects. I mean, somebody called about their baby book the other day, so I'm working on that tomorrow with the homeowner. Somebody else called regarding a passport. I don't know if I'm going to take that case. Sometimes you're not going to find things. I mean, I hate to say this, but sometimes you just have a 50-50 shot, and I can pick up if it's a 50-50 shot, then I'll tell the client the fee. If they don't want to pay it, which a lot of times people just don't want to pay me, which is that's their choice, and if they don't want to, I can't move forward. So a lot of people are thinking, oh, well, dowsing and psychic work is all free. It's not. This is what I do for a living, and then it is taxing. A lot of people will call and say, hey, can you teach me? Yes, I teach. I don't teach remote viewing. I send jobs to Angela. While we're waiting for Dale and Angela, if anybody has any questions, I'll be happy to answer.
They're actually in the house now. Angela, welcome back.
Dale.
There
Where's
you go.
Dale?
And Dale's right here.
Okay.
Welcome, everybody. Welcome, Dale. Welcome to the show.
Okay.
I'm Grizzly, and Ginette's on the phone, or actually on the show. Welcome. Glad to have you.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, we
Yeah.
can hear you loud and clear.
Okay.
Can you hear us?
Yes, right now I can. I couldn't earlier, but I can now.
Yeah, I had you backstage there.
Okay.
Ginette was talking. So, yes, welcome to the show.
Okay.
Grizzly and Ginette, True Crime.
Okay.
So, we're excited to have you.
All right.
So, yeah, so you worked with the Defense Intelligence Agency, we hear.
That's right.
Yeah, so everybody's watching this is really interested in learning about you. So tell us all about you.
Okay. Shall I start, Angela?
Yeah, you go ahead. This is about you tonight, Dale.
Oh, well,
We
anyway.
want to know your story.
Yeah, I'll start with the Defense Intelligence Agency. I was employed by them from about 1980 till 1993. So I had a lot of good years there. Prior to that, I worked with the Farm Technology Division in Dayton, Ohio. And during both these assignments, I was involved in technical analysis of trying to determine weapon system capabilities of the Soviet Union and other communist countries. When I moved to Washington, D.C. in 1981, actually earlier, I became involved with this remote viewing research and became, at that time, the contract manager for Harold Putoff and Russell Targ at the Stanford Research Institute. So I have many years of involvement in technical intelligence and in working with the remote viewing research and later on the operational activity. My professional background is aerospace engineering and physics. I expanded my background quite a bit when I went over into the worked with the remote viewing field for many years. And that's where I met Angela when she joined the operational unit that we had set up at Fort Meade, Maryland. Now, prior to that, the research had been done not in the government, but it was contracted out to the Stanford Research Institute in Menlo Park. And about 1979, and the research started in 1972, actually, but the operational part, where we actually had people that had a natural ability to do remote viewing, what we call remote viewing, which is basically the ability to describe distant scenes and without any way of knowing that information. It's just a mental process. I always like to link it to something like what we used to be called extrasensory perception, but we modified it to include a certain method and focus. So we had a different name, then we called it remote viewing. And we began our operational work in 1979, 1980. And that's where later on I became the chief of the operational unit. I actually created the name Stargate when I came up there and became managing it directly. Now that's really a quick run through of my involvement and background.
That's very impressive. So you actually named the program Stargate itself?
Yes. Yes. We kicked that around because in the operational side of the remote viewing program, it was a code word project, meaning it had special access. We just didn't want it well known, obviously, for many reasons, to protect the individuals and also the kind of projects that we worked on. And code words are just terms that that the government gives various projects that have higher degrees of secrecy requirements. And when the operational activity first began, it was actually through an Army group, which later merged with the Defense Intelligence Agency. But the early code words were different names, strange sounding names like Center Lane and Grill Flame. And when the unit was transferred into the Defense Intelligence Agency, around that time, I suggested we had a meeting with the Fort Meade team, and we debated different names. The names that we were supposed to use in the security code book were not very good, so I suggested Stargate, and it was accepted. And, I had to go through some paperwork to get it approved. So then the latter part of the activity then was the Stargate operational program, and that name has kind of linked with throughout the history, even though we had other names. That's the name that seems to be remembered most now.
Well, yeah. I mean, we still talk about it to this day, sir. It's an honor and a privilege just to even have you on the show with Angela. I'm so ecstatic that Ginette even has brought you all on. I'm speechless once again, Angela and Ginette. I don't know what to say. I'm shocked.
Well, Dale was heavily involved with the scientific research. So he worked heavily with Stanford Research Group. Whenever you were with the Defense Intelligence Agency, Dale had direct contact with the scientists at SRI because Dale is a scientist. So he had a lot of input with what the scientists were doing, right, Dale?
Oh, yes, absolutely. In fact, I have a really strong hand in defining the statements of work and preparing the contracts for them. This went back even before the operational name Stargate and the operational activity began. The initial research that I became involved in was actually in 1976 when I was with the Air Force. Now, at that time, we didn't really give it a specific name. It was just a classified program. It wasn't really top secret or anything. But that was the research part. And that's the part where I became directly involved in. And even though it started several years earlier through a CIA contract, when that contract was not renewed, then the Air Force stepped in. And it became then the Department of Defense project, the research aspect. And then ultimately, the application part was Army initiated and then joined with the DIA, but all that time it was a Department of Defense activity.
So see, Dale was at the Defense Okay, you started out in Ohio, and CIA gave SRI a small contract. When that contract ran out, you stepped in and gave SRI the contract. And then somehow you made your way out of Ohio with the Foreign Technology Division, and you ended up with DIA. But you were always involved at some level looking at what the Soviets were doing in parapsychology research and looking at this field. And then eventually you just ended up in the operational part with us as my boss.
Yes,
right?
Correct. So I had several things I did, yes.
So, Ginette here. So I had a silly question. I mean, we're going to ask you a bunch of silly questions. I hope you don't mind. We really appreciate you. So did you ever get to meet my father, Louis Matasha, or do you not remember?
I lost your voice. It went off my speaker. Could you maybe try repeating it?
Sure. So I was curious. My father, Louis Matasha, was a dowser, and he was in and out of the Fort Meade office and the Arlington office. And I was just curious if you ever worked with him at any time.
I did not personally work with him. I regret not having been able to do that. I certainly heard a lot about his work, but I never had any direct personal contact with him. Maybe
I was just curious to what degree. To my knowledge, my father was working with military.
I'm sorry, with who?
Her father was working more with military. Her father would come to Arlington Hall Station and meet with General Stubblebine.
Oh, I see. Okay, I didn't know that connection. Okay, you'll have to fill in because I didn't know that connection at Arlington Hall.
Her father would work with General Stubblebine and John Alexander. That's who.
Oh, okay. I see the connection. Yeah, I knew John Alexander. I didn't know. John was not directly involved with the Stargate program, but I did occasionally meet with John Alexander on different occasions to discuss research and that. So, but I never met you. It's really unfortunate that I didn't get to meet your father. It was a missed opportunity. It didn't happen. I regret that.
Now, whenever you were associated with SRI, did you know Yuri? Did you have a chance to meet Yuri Geller and Ingo Swann?
Well, naturally, Ingo Swann. We had many sessions together. In fact, that's one of the first times I really got to know much about the field. My first trip out there was in working fairly closely with Ingo on different demonstration projects, and then later some of the research projects. So yeah, over the years, I really had a close connection with Ingo, and in fact, he would come to Washington D.C. occasionally with Hal Puthoff and Russell Targ, and we would have meetings with different representatives at that time, and in fact, he helped in some of our briefings that we gave to the military generals. So, my connections with him went throughout my whole involvement. I did not meet Uri Geller personally, because that occurred at SRI before I became directly involved. In fact, that probably was around 1971 and 72, I believe, when Uri was brought into this country to do those experiments with Hal and Russ. And I think Edgar Mitchell was partly responsible for that. That the work they did at that time was with Uri at the Stanford Research Institute. Now, I never got to meet Uri directly. At a conference one time, I did attend a conference, not connected with the program. It was just a conference that was set up somewhere. I attended that, and I did get to see him personally and talk to him. But I didn't at that time acknowledge a connection with the intelligence community.
So he was much earlier than you, several years earlier than you.
Yeah, right. That's correct. Yeah. I would have liked to really work directly with him, but at that time there was a lot of controversy about the metal bending capability that he had, and they were not able to replicate it directly in the laboratory at SRI. I think certain things happened, but it was after the control periods had ended, and there were incidents that suggested the effect occurred, but they couldn't validate it scientifically. Now, Uri did demonstrate some ability on drawing hidden pictures that somebody had sketched some in another room. So it was kind of the beginning, what you might say, what we call remote picture drawing or remote viewing, even though it wasn't given a name at that moment, but maybe a couple of years later, that was the terminology we used. Yeah, I would have liked to meet him and really work with him, but then he went on.
You were just off a little bit. He was just a few years before you.
Yes, correct.
And did you know Hala Hamid and Pat Price?
Yeah. Oh, well, I didn't know Pat Price. He died in about 1974 or 5, and I came on board in 76. So I did not know Pat Price other than through his work and our discussions and reminiscences at SRI. Hala Hamid and I, we had some nice times together because I was able to work with her on some of the research programs or projects. We had long discussions on the phenomenon. How does it work, and how does she perceive what she perceives, and so we exchanged a lot of good ideas on the process and whatever. So I had some really good connections with her. In fact, it was her experiment that really helped the Air Force approve the first contract to continue with it. And at that time, it was kind of I want to say a lucky break, but it's really unusual to have this unusual field remote viewing be presented to the Air Force commander at FTD, and they agreed to extend the contract for at least a year. But in order for it to continue, I had to have some really good results. And one of the first experiments I did was with Hala, and Hal and Russ were visiting our place in Dayton, Ohio, at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, and I had set up a protocol pretty much like what Hal had been using for his sites around the Bay Area. I got 10 unusual targets or diverse targets, and they were randomly arranged in opaque envelopes and whatever. But they were like the buildings and the airports and the runways and the rivers from around the Dayton area. And I thought, well, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to go to something really unique, something that he hasn't done before that I'm aware of. And Hela was in New York City at the time visiting, and she agreed to do the experiment while I was calling her from Ohio. She did not know where I was calling from. Hal and Russ did not tell her their destination. All she was asked to do was describe where we were going to be at a certain time. and I surprised Hal and Russ, and I took them to a cave outside of Columbus, Ohio. I said, "This is the kind of target that they're not expecting. They've only been doing buildings and runways and things like that, churches and configurations you could walk down the street and look at almost every day. But this is different." So that was the surprise. I did not tell Hal or Russ where I was going, so I drove the 40 miles to the cave and got there in time, and we went through the tour. And at the time, Hella was doing her thing in New York, relaxing and trying to perceive where we were. And when we got out of the cave, I called her, and still not telling her anything at all. And I said, "Okay, Hella, what did you see?" And then she went on to describe everything that sounded like being in a cave, a dark, deep, underground, misty place, spooky, whatever, no. All the good things you can describe about a cave. And this was so mind-blowing to the people at the Foreign Technology Division. How could she do this? But it was, that's the whole thing. How can anybody do remote viewing? But it was the beginning, even it was not a technical project per se, but it was a strong enough demonstration that it got their attention, and then we kept going from there with the research program. So Helen and I had other good times too in terms of projects, and some of them had to do with just describing different scenes and an area, or one of my favorites was the future thing. Where will we be at 1 o'clock tomorrow afternoon? And then she would go into her relaxing period, and of course nobody knew where we were going. We didn't either at the time. And then the next day, we pulled a number at random, and we went to that place, and it was really pretty much what she described. So it was one of the first times we really demonstrated of what traditionally in the parapsychology community would be referred to as precognition. So she was able to describe a scene that had not yet been selected. Nobody knew what it was going to be. It was randomly selected from a large target pool. That was very impressive, and that was another big step forward in the research that we were doing at the time.
So Dale, were you involved with hiring anyone, or you just walked in the door and the people were there based on the contract?
I'm sorry, I really have to apologize for the acoustics here. Try that run again.
Okay, so just out of curiosity, were you involved in hiring the people, the staff that worked on the remote viewing, or were you just walking in the door and the analysts that were remote viewers were there basically?
Well, the research side, which was independent of the government people, that was handled through SRI. I mean, they were the ones locating people like Hella and Pat Price, and then of course Ingo showed up on the scene. But they did their own selection, mostly from individuals, other than the ones I just mentioned, from the SRI staff. So they did that selection, if you want to call hiring. It was more or less just using them for a certain project, not every now and then, a certain research project. They weren't necessarily full-time people that we just used as a need be. Now, later on, when the operational unit was established by the Army, there was a process that the Army initially went through to identify people that had an interest in the topic, and then and they narrowed that down to 5, and then they were sent out to SRI for further work, and you might say a little bit of training. I was not involved in that. That was the Army staffing. But later, when it became part of the Defense Intelligence Agency, yes, I did have a hand in selecting individuals for the project. And remember, we're not a big project. We've ranged anywhere from 4 or 5 to maybe 10 or 11. So other than administrative people, we didn't really have that large a group, and it just sort of averaged around 6 or 7. During the time I was there, maybe 8. Depending on how you count administrative help. Yeah, I did have a hand at that time.
So did you have, I'm going to ask you a bunch of silly questions. I'm sure people are curious what really happened. So I'm going to pick your brain.
Okay.
So were you an 8-hour a day employee or a contractor? Either way, were you an 8-hour a day, or were you an employee or a contractor of the government?
Well, I was a full-time employee.
He was a government employee that worked for the Foreign Technology Division in Ohio. Then he came to DIA to work, but his interest has always been parapsychology research. He was looking at what the Soviets were doing. He's a scientist. He was understanding the science of it. And the CIA back in the early 1970s gave Stanford Research Institute a small contract. Stanford Institute it's a private organization that was doing its own parapsychology research. When that contract ended and CIA didn't renew it, Dale, working in Ohio at the Foreign Technology Division, he renewed the contract. You got them a contract, right?
That's right. But we were employed by the government.
He's a government employee, but you pay outside people. You pay contractors to do work for you. Right. And Stanford was known at that time to be. They had a very robust remote viewing research. They were, more so than I would say Princeton or even Duke. So money was going to SRI saying, what are you doing? SRI had their own psychics. So that was going on at SRI. Our operational group, as far as remote viewers, people who were psychic or who had ESP abilities that worked within the government system, that didn't occur until when? 1976, right?
No, 79.
79.
Yeah, right. Okay.
Yeah. But prior to this group at Fort Meade, Maryland, where you had these remote viewers doing operational remote viewing precognitive ESP activity, there was this huge effort into the research of parapsychology, like from people like Dale, who were scientists in the research and development field in the government. And Dale, you were also looking at what other countries, what were they doing in this realm, especially the Soviet Union. We were in the Cold War period. And Dale, that was always Dale's area. You always looked at things like different things. You weren't standard. You were always looking at things that were considered different within the intelligence community.
Right, because at that time, I was involved in advanced technology assessments, and I actually published reports on Soviet work, and included Soviet parapsychology, Soviet psi, a term that's used for the field, psi, PSI. I included that in my reports, and I even had an extensive study that I had published that actually was influential in keeping the contract alive in later years, based on the findings that I and my team were able to discover from going through the Soviet classified literature. So yeah, that was a big aspect of the work that I was doing, even though it was part of a technology assessment group. I managed to include parapsychology into it at that time. It was unique. Now, I also want to say something else about the FTD times. Even though I was involved with the research from 1976 onward, when I was able to get that first contract approved and returned to FTD, the Foreign Technology Division, I thought it would be a good idea to replicate their research findings to the best of our ability with people from within our own organization that had the higher clearances. And it didn't take too long before I found about 3 people that had really good talent in what we were doing, that we were calling remote viewing. So, and we actually had an operational project that was very successful. And this is before the Fort Meade group was formally established. So you might, in a way, at the Foreign Technology Division, we did have an informal operational activity. I call it informal because the Air Force was not totally comfortable with the field yet. So I was given approval tacitly to work operational projects where I could, but not to work it into the formal documentation of the organization, like later on happened with Army and then PA. So anyway, it was at that time that now becoming a classic in the field when the Soviet airplane that crashed in Africa, and I had a really direct hand in that operational project. While I was at FTD, working with an individual at FTD that had really good talent in this field.
And I think that's what started it. The first time they would, since that was it wasn't sanctioned, it wasn't a formal program, but the fact of that success, I think that was the start of maybe the government saying maybe we should have an operational remote viewing group.
It helped. It definitely helped. Now, of course, there was a parallel interest in the Army that I didn't know about at the time, and we kind of came together. We intersected. But that airplane incident was probably the initial one, and one of the most significant for keeping the program going or igniting new interest. Now, early on at SRI, there was a project involving Pat Price in about 1973 or 72 that actually involved describing a very unique situation in the Soviet Union in terms of redevelopment activity that related to high energy work, some kind of nuclear research that got the interest of the CIA, but that didn't carry forward. That did not really influence us very much in the Air Force, because our interest at the time the Air Force was what can if it's real, what can the phenomenon do, or what can the ability do for Air Force missions. And so I wrote up a document that really helped the Air Force make a decision to move ahead with supporting SRI, and that was for Air Force missions and locating missing airplanes. And of course, you might say by synchronicity, that was the first project that was laid on our desk. But there's also what can we do for understanding the phenomenon and better appraising what the Soviets might be able to do with it. So Air Force missions, and then of course the intelligence world. What can we use the phenomenon for in terms of predicting future developments? And at that time, the orientation was for Air Force missions, and of course, then later on, when the Army activated their effort, it shifted really to a border-based activity. In the CIA had some tasking that came in, and then other agencies became involved. And then when the DIA was established, I picked up the project, the operational side. And the Defense Intelligence Agency is a manager for all of the intelligence activities within the Department of Defense. So we had a working groups established with members from the Navy, and of course also from the Army, from the Coast Guard, and other agencies. The Homeland Security, that when it was established, Customs, FBI had a hand in it. Secret Service had a hand in it. So we were expanding the role, or the potential role, of what remote viewing could be applied to within the government. It was not only a defense intelligence focused thing, even though the work remained within the Defense Intelligence Agency at that time later on. So it was a multi-service.
Yeah, any intelligence agency could come to us and task us.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Our home was within was with the Defense Intelligence Agency, but any intelligence organization could come to us and ask for our help.
Yeah,
that's how we worked.
Yeah, and that was the value of setting up that working group, because we were able to get some really interesting tasks.
And that's how we got our customers. That's how we called them our customers.
That's right.
That's how we could get, and we got some interesting, we had some interesting stuff. CIA used us. Now I never knew why the FBI didn't use us. And what I found out much later is when the program shut down, there was a man who worked. His name was Scott Carmichael, and he was a DIA investigator. He helped catch Ana Montes. He identified Ana Montes as the Cuban spy that worked at DIA.
Mm-hmm.
Now, anytime there's an arrest made in the intelligence community, it's always the FBI that makes the arrest. So I was working a case with Scott. He asked, this was after the program closed down, and he asked me to help him. Well, because we identified somebody who was a spy. So he works with the FBI agents, and he has to say, well, this is what I have, and these are the leads, and oh yeah, this is the person. So the FBI goes and makes the arrest. Now, Scott told me that whenever he worked with me, he never told the FBI that he was working with a psychic, that the information he was getting was from a psychic. And he said the reason was, Angela, if the case ever went to court, that it would be thrown out. I guess if they said they got the information from a psychic, it would have been thrown out. They don't look at, the court system doesn't look at information from a psychic as being valid. So he said, I never told them how I got the information, because if it ever got to the point where he was in court and an arrest was made, he didn't want it not to happen because of me. So the guy did go to court. They did arrest him, and then Scott told the FBI. He said, I used this. We got this because of me, a psychic. Well, I think that's why out of all the intelligence organizations that came to us for help, the FBI never did.
I think they were in the background working maybe with the Secret Service. I think there were a few projects that we had with them, terrorist predictions and whatever. I can remember the incident, I think it was 1981 or 82, with the Christmas tree ceremony at the White House. And the query that came to us was there was some rumor that a well-known terrorist might appear on the scene to do some really dirty things. At the time, the president showed up for the lighting ceremony. So the concern was, should we even go ahead with this and just cancel it? And so you might. I don't know if you were involved in that one, Angela, before you came on board. And we did work out. And the terrorist at that time, he was known as Collis the Jackal, a name that carried with him. And struck fear into the hearts of men and women. So it was rumored that he might be in country, and if he was, then very likely there would be an attack during that lighting ceremony, which was like December the 15th of that year. So we worked on that, and nobody could come up with a sense that, and this is for the Secret Service, that we couldn't come up with a sense that there was any imminent threat. We just couldn't. Nobody sensed anything dire, and we passed that on. And I'm not sure if that had an influence, but the president showed up, nothing happened. So then, so in a sense, it was a null result. But we learned later that there was plans that he had planned to do some dirty stuff, but something changed his mind, and he stayed in Africa, some hidden location. So later on, we found out that's where he was during the time of the lighting, although the intentions were earlier to go to Washington. So, anyway, we did some work there, and it seemed to be helpful. But
so Dale, let me do this from your career standpoint. Did you sort of fall into your position? I mean, granted, you were educated, but did you see the posting for the ad, or somebody told you about, oh, they're starting this new program? Does it interest you? What made you fall into the position you fell into, out of curiosity?
Are you talking to me now?
Yes, Dale, yes.
Yeah, I'm really apologize. There's something wrong with the microphone here.
Okay, so I'll say it again. So from your standpoint of your early career, you had already been educated as a physicist and so forth. And then all of a sudden you're working for a particular group in Ohio, then a particular group at Fort Meade, Maryland. And I was just curious, were you reaching out to find this kind of opportunity, or the opportunity fell in your lap?
Oh gosh, now we're talking about a lot of different things. I could use words like synchronicity, dumb luck, weirdness.
Right.
But,
Yeah. Oh yeah.
my initially employment was on the Gemini launch program with the Martin Company in Maryland. I was an aerospace engineer, and I'm involved in that program and advanced design projects for the company as an aerospace individual, analyzing different things about aircraft, reentry heating, future designs, and things of that nature. Then I worked in a Gemini launch vehicle, and when that of course became very successful, and when that program actually went operational, you might say, it was we were able to build it and it worked. Then the company decided to move all the facilities to the West Coast. Well, actually to Denver, and another one to Orlando. And I didn't really want to go to either place at that time. I had reasons for staying on the East Coast. And just by chance, an organization I never heard of before, the Foreign Technology Division, had a representative in Baltimore. I thought this would be an interesting place to go to for a year or two, see what it's like inside the government. And I really got to like the job, so I stayed. So, but while I was there, I was not doing anything having to do with this field. I had an interest in it for most of my life, but it was only because I found things that the Soviets were doing and wrote that up that really brought me into it. And that's why I was named as the contract manager, because I was about the only one in the whole organization that knew anything about the topic or even wanted to know anything about the topic.
Yeah, because you discovered what the Soviets were doing.
Yeah, that was key for me to get into it, even though I was coming in from a totally technological background. It was just sort of one of those happenstance kinds of things. But I was kind of prepared for it because of the work I did earlier, to figure out what the Soviets were doing. And that was totally voluntary. Nobody said I should do that. And I just happened to find some information that struck my interest, and I wrote it up, and it moved forward, and became part of a national intelligence estimate.
Right.
But my prior to that, I just had a strong interest in the field. I was a very prolific dreamer. I had all kinds of dreams, night dreams, and some of them were precognitive. So I already was predisposed to the phenomena. So that helped me accept the moving into a topic that did not have a lot of good support most of the time, and in fact, for many people, it was a career buster. The topic thing you didn't really want to do if you wanted to advance your military career. One of the problems we had at Fort Meade was if somebody gets assigned to the unit, then what? Is being assigned to a crazy unit like that. The only way you can go from here on is out the door in your next assignment. You're not going to get promoted doing something like that.
It's definitely a unique unit. Did you find that okay, so I'm going in a different and very similar to about your career. So did you find your work was identical or very similar to the Department of Army, where they were doing psi work also, or no?
Well, I didn't know about the Army work in 1976 when I set up that mini or unofficial operational group of 2 or 3 people. I didn't know about them, but it was modeled after the work that the Stanford research was doing. So, okay. And that's also what led to the Army group set up too. It was based really on the research done at the Stanford with the Stanford group. So we had that common root. So naturally, they're going to look similar. Individuals have different understandings of it. Some people come in totally independent of that, like Angela did in a way. An individual I worked with at FTD had no prior formal background. She was just natural at it. But we used the methodology. We used the concept behind what we were doing to make sure that it passed scientific mention that even though there's an operational activity, not research, where you really need to really watch protocol very carefully if you want to ever get something published in a journal. But for the operational, it's not quite that stringent. But on the other hand, you have to make sure that there's no information leakage. There's no what we call front loading. So that's why we kept the people that were directly involved in tasking totally blind to or not informed at all of the specifics that were desired, other than maybe occasionally a general notion, if somebody is missing, find them, that kind of thing. So, or for technical projects, we would use some arbitrary reference number, and the people directly involved in that would not know, had no clue of what the final result would be. So and that's consistent with what the protocol is in the scientific research.
You have to follow a protocol to keep the remote viewer clean. So that
Yeah,
was always looked at.
there's several ways of looking at protocol. One is the way you approach the phenomenon to actually have it manifest in yourself, and the other is the control of the data aspects, what I call just the record keeping process. That protocol needs to be followed pretty tightly. We had scientific panels that reviewed our work. Of course, SRI had all kinds of scientific scrutiny. They are in a scientific environment, so what they do is got to be clean. Or they will damage the reputation of the organization. And at that time, with all the ridicule leveled against the field, with people like Randy the magician, who was always looking for a way to poke fun at parapsychology, and people had said they had psychic or remote viewing ability just for their own fame, and so you had all this negative stuff, and even in the scientific levels, the people really came down hard on the research. Most of these were from psychology departments, and it's been my experience over the years that of all the professional groups that I've dealt with on this topic, it's really all of them. The groups that are least acceptable of this phenomenon are the psychologists. Now, I think that's because of the training that they go through, the Freudian perspective of the human personality, and all dreams are Freudian, kind of thing. So it is a bias that creeps into people at a professional level. But physicists, once you wrestle with quantum physics, you're pretty well mind blown from that point on. So why is something like ESP or remote viewing any weirder than entanglement or particles that keep connected no matter where they are in the universe, or quantum tunneling, or the principles nowadays used for advanced computers were they were weirder. So quantum physics, the mentality, I should say, of physicists, they didn't really have that difficult a time to say, yeah, well, let's take a look at this phenomenon. And that's, I think, brought Hal and Russ into the picture. And even in the scientific panel we put together, the condition for them reviewing the work was you don't have to believe in the phenomenon, and many of them did not. I mean, they were really aghast at what we were trying to do. What there was this tea leaf reading doing in the government, that kind of thing. So, but we had them sign papers that said, look, only look at the protocol, only look at the data flow, only look at the way it's handled. Don't make a biased assessment based on your expectations that it either worked or didn't work. So you got to keep them neutral. But by the time they got through reviewing the projects or the work at SRI, many of them really did shift their negativity to say, well, yeah, there may be something here. We don't know what it is, but there's something going on.
I'm going to interject. If you can hear me okay, Ginette here. I'm going to interject something. I just read an article about a California company who found that some people who they believe are very psychic have what's called magnetized crystals, and they found that in parts of their brain, not the pineal gland. It would be the top of the brain. Have you heard anything about that, or you out of that?
No, I've not heard that specific thing, but I'm not surprised that there are aspects of the brain that we don't fully understand. In fact, there's that work that started maybe 10 years ago down at the University of Arizona with Scott Hemmeroff, where he identified what he called microtubules in the brain structure that have no known purpose, but they kind of fit the dimensions of something like a quantum level resonator, if that's a good term. But these microtubules exist throughout the body. So those and maybe magnetic ferrites, that those aspects are in the brain that might actually be a clue to how some of the information is perceived. It's hard to say. It's really hard to say. We really don't know how clearly to define consciousness in the first place.
Right.
Or even our own sensory system. Newton, Sir Isaac Newton, who wrote one of the first major treatments on optics and color, and he even said, "What is the redness in red? I can understand pretty much everything else, but I don't know where the sensation in red or any sensory thing, even pain. How does the brain actually translate this aspect of our experience from inert molecules?" And you can boil everything down to just molecules. There's the worst feeling in them. So even ordinary sensory perceptions, to me, is a mystery. And considering ESP and remote viewing, it's just another parallel mystery to them.
Well, I think it's much more recognizable than it was back in those days, especially in the paranormal field. When it comes to even Sasquatch and cryptids, going to the other side of the spectrum, we have well-known people that's been in the field 30 to 50 years are starting to look at quantum physics and looking into those realms and saying, hey, there are something is out there, and we need to enlighten things and look outside the box. So, I mean, I can only imagine what you all trifle through back in the year trying to get the program up and running and, getting the data and, getting the reports out. And, I think the last time, Angela Ford said pretty much a laughing stock, right?
Oh, it's
giggle factor.
You got to really be careful who you talk to. I can remember some awful discussions with high-level people on this. So and things later on were a little better, but when the scientific panels that were brought together to review the program in 1995, there were people on board that were still from old school, still from way back with the biases that they just couldn't get rid of. So. No, but now, that's 25 years ago. So now, things are certainly different now. And the internet, people exchanging ideas quicker and experiences better, and groups being set up to study the phenomenon specifically. There are many groups now. The Edgar Mitchell set up the IONS, the Institute for Genetic Studies. We have the International Remote Viewing Association. There's a group that really focuses on dreams, the International Association for the Study of Dreams. And you can go on and find lists of groups like this that are really, really helping to promote our understanding, or at least the acceptance of these abilities that we all have. And the more and more people that are aware of it, and they surprise themselves when they say, "Yeah, I really can do this." This is like it's latent in all of us, and we different people have different levels of response and level of attainment, but we're all intuitive, is just somewhat better than others in this intuitive aspect, and branch off into specific applications of like the remote viewing or the other forms of sensitivity that we have, healing abilities, for example, or just plain sensitivities. So it's there within us. We just need to work on it and accept that it's real, and forget the naysayers, and go on from there.
Was there, to interject, was there any one particular project that was your favorite just because of the process or the protocol? For example, Angela was saying that the CIA and so forth were different agencies were your clients. Was there any one particular job that you found most exciting from your standpoint, from a physicist standpoint?
Um, I think from a physicist standpoint, the research projects that reveal the reality of precognition is the one that like Hellas, and that's going way back. But all the other projects that relate to precognition, to me personally, strike the most significant, because now you're challenging more than just simply the nature of or ordinary idea of reality. You're now bringing into the concept of what is the future. Where is the future?
Right.
How does information really exist ahead in time? And if we can pick it up, whether we're remote viewers or other forms of psychic aspects or potentials, then what does that mean about fate and free will? So it borders into these issues, really important considerations for consciousness. So to me, those are the most significant research. Now, we had many research projects that picked away at aspects of trying to make it more reliable and better and easier to be evaluated. But I'm talking about those that relate more to the philosophical, more you might even say the spiritual aspect of our being. What's really going on here in the universe. We're looking at the more than three-dimensional set of realities, that's for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Opening up that perspective. So that's the research side. Now, from the operational or the applied side, yeah, I've got a bunch of them. The one that Angela did is one that really stands out for me, because it's one of the ones that really stand out because it was ahead in time, where the futures could be caught, not where it is now. And it brought people together in remote areas of the country, and that probably didn't really think much about the phenomenon, but they were able to react and pay attention and actually locate the fugitives. So to me, that was and then of course the FBI and the Secret Service got into that and apprehended the individual. So that was an exciting one. And the one, of course, I mentioned the aircraft one. That was personally exciting, challenging, and important for me.
Mm-hmm.
It really put a lot on the line. Here we are, a couple of people, myself and individual I was working with, it really never worked on an operational project before. Think of the pressure. And here's a situation where there's an airplane in Africa, and the search team is in there clandestinely, and they have to get out of there in a couple of days, 2 days, and they like to leave with parts of the airplane that crashed. So before somebody else found it, and the information we came up with got them within about a mile of it, and it was part of the search area they hadn't even considered to look at. So that was exciting. And another one for me personally was the involvement with finding General Dozier when he kidnapped him by a Red terrorist group in Italy in 1981. And eventually I was part of that team, the search team in Italy, and we came up with some data that really brought us very close to where he was being held captive. And an individual at Fort Meade actually had accurate data too. But
John McMonagle worked that case.
yeah, he came
Mm-hmm.
up with a good data. I was in the field, and at the time I didn't really. This data was not sent to me because there was a follow-up on the transmission side. But
Oh.
yeah, so I never saw it until I came back So
Oh,
that was a case where it's one of the few times I've ever stepped in myself, and I actually did have dreams that were very
oh,
of the terrorists. So it was personally interesting to me, but I never really identified the source of the data was,
Mhm.
which is typical for all DIA reporting, and you assemble the data. You do your best estimate if you're going to prioritize. If you're working with more than one or two people, how do you prioritize? So you have to come up with a judgment, and then you come in with a consolidated report. But we never identified who did what. So if you get hold of the reports, you won't know who did what, where, when. But that was just simply our procedure.
for protecting the individual, for
Yeah, right.
I
And
mean, that actually makes sense, though. Yeah.
protecting the source. We were the source. We protected the source.
yeah, it also kept egos out of the way too, because some people would have felt slighted, and they were always, toward the bottom end of the priority list. So you had, and if somebody's consistently at the top, you didn't want them to walk around saying, "Hey, I'm better than you." So there was an issue of how do you balance this natural tendency that we all have when we're working together as a team to make it a team effort, not just focused on one individual only. So there were challenges here. So and anyway, so we'd never identify who did what.
Amazing. So now you're retired at this point, correct?
Oh yes, yes. I retired actually in 1993. So it's been a bunch of years.
Right. So do you ever get called back for any kind of other special program?
Not me personally. I stayed away from it and did my own thing, and I shifted to my other interest and worked on with the Association for the Study of Dreams. And did a lot of precognitive work and got some things published there on what we call retrocausation, and did some presentations in physics symposiums showing precognitive work that I've been doing with a colleague. And what got their attention in the physics community with this particular approach was working with future news pictures that would show up 3 to 7 days ahead of time. There were two aspects: 3 days ahead, and then the next series was 7 days ahead. Yeah, so
I can't hear. Say it. Get closer to your speaker.
Oh, I'm sorry. I backed off, and I'm the one causing the problem. Yeah, so I set up a protocol where we're working, trying to describe a news photograph that would be published on a specific page of a specific newspaper 3 days in the future, and then another series, same thing, but 7 days in the future. And we found that there was no difference in quality. That they both yielded good, accurate data. So again, here's the issue of precognition. How can anyone, whether it's a dreamer or a remote viewer or whatever term you want to give the individual, perceive and actually draw a photograph that doesn't exist yet, that the event has not yet occurred? It can depend on weather, and how predictable weather is. So yeah, we were able to do that. So that was one of my main interests, and still is, for that matter.
So let me ask you this. So I do my own studies for fun. And of course, Angela and I keep planning to get together, but we'll eventually get back together again and chit chat about some of our work. And I do my own stuff because I'm the daughter of Louis Matasha, who did his own type of work too.
Sure.
But I grew up with, use your dreams to do predictions, or use your dreams for answers to questions, that kind of thing. And what was interesting for me is that, and I have lectured for the Association of Dreams in Vienna, Virginia. And at that time, shortly after a near-death experience, I started explaining that I was taught on the other side how to, I call it incubating my dreams. I know we're shifting into something else, but our audience might be interested in this, but anyway, so I called it dream incubation, and
Okay.
it's more you could do out of body or you could do explanations, and you could say I use different techniques to find out when is something terrible going to happen. So I predicted the Berlin Wall, and I gave dates and times, and then I did plane crashes, dates and information, and airlines, and I predicted 9/11, and I said, oh, it'll happen on September 11, but it's going to be in the newspaper the next day, so I'm pretty sure it's September 11. And I said early in the morning. So these are just examples of fun stuff I do on the side, and so I was going to talk to Angela about it, and I just use all these weird approaches. And it's a protocol, but I have found that it's incredibly accurate. And for example, I'll do some incubation on my I treasure hunt, and I work on some other true crimes to locate missing people. And what I do is try to say, show me where the remains of the victim would be located, or show me where the treasure is located. And I ask for the landmarks around the treasure. And it has been really accurate. I have been very lucky that it works. And so had you ever had the experience of um, in your particular groupings of people with what I'm calling it dream incubation, but you may term it another type of approach or protocol, period. Have you ever heard of doing that kind of thing?
Oh yeah, and as a member of the ASD, the International Association for the Study of Dreams, that's a common term that we use. And in fact, I do occasional work with them, and just sort of contests. It's not particularly serious, but we have fun doing them. But some of the people I work with are really good at what we call lucid dreaming. That is, you become aware in a dream that you are dreaming, and when you get into that particular perceptual mode, then you can move around in dream space. And we've also used the lucid dreaming mode on hidden targets. So, like you say, it's a form of incubation. Is just a sort of a focus, an intent. It's like a little recipe that you go through to help focus your mind, your conscious mind, and then later on when you're dreaming, that instruction continues forward, or that desire. So yes, it's a way you can seek a type of dream, whether it's a psychic or precognitive, or whether just simply exploring the dream space in itself for whatever value there might be. And it could be inspirational, it could be creation, for creating things. I have a lot of friends that do write poetry and do come out with them from a lucid dream with material for painting, or even music, writing music. And this is really not that uncommon, but it's not commonly talked about. I think Paul McCarthy of the Beatles.
We can't hear you.
Yeah, I think Paul McCarthy of the Beatles.
McCartney?
Yeah, often talked about the dreams that led to some of his well-known songs. Yeah,
I did hear that. That was very impressive.
Yeah.
So Grizzly, we don't want to keep you forever. Grizzly, what are your questions? Any questions? Or
no, actually, y'all answered all of my questions across the board. I'm very impressed. It's very interesting to learn about this because, we talk about this daily in our shows and across the board. When it comes to the Stargate, about the government programs that happened back in the day, about who did what and how and who was involved and who did what and who touched what and how everything worked. And it's very honorable just to have the opportunity to able to discuss the process and learn about it from firsthand, Ginette. I mean, that's very important in my book, isn't it?
The facts, just the facts. Yeah, Dale, I guess our key factor is we hear so many conspiracy theories. To hear it from the person who was there and in charge, and also to hear from Angela, it really makes a big difference. There's so much chatter out there about blah, blah, blah stuff happened, and it never happened. And
Yeah.
then, so I brought Angela in and we did a part 1 and a part 2. And now you're sort of part 3 about, yes, I was the boss. I was, I'm an educated physicist, which I think is awesome for people to understand. Oh, this was a big part of your life, which is, it must have been an amazing ride.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, there were many times I would just walk around the block and go out in the woods and say, how did I get here?
Oh, yeah. So, yeah, you said synchronicity or just dumb luck.
Yeah.
Great terminology. I think Angela was dumb luck too.
It was just, I got to Washington, D.C. based on a stolen car. My car was stolen. I was working in the Poconos. I was working in the Poconos and I'm from Western Pennsylvania. I graduated from college, and my sister, she had a criminology degree, and she wanted to be a state trooper. So she said, we're going to be cops. Well, the Pennsylvania Police Academy was closed that year. So we went to the local Holiday Inn and we became waitresses, and we were waiting for the Pennsylvania State Police Academy to open up. Well, a year came and went, and it didn't open up again. So people that we knew that we were working with, they said, go to the Poconos this summer, enjoy yourself. It may take a while for that academy to open up. So I didn't have a car. And my dad said, well, how are you going to get there? You don't have a car. I said, I'm going to buy a car. I bought a car for $25. So I went to the Poconos. The car kept breaking down. So we took it to a garage to get fixed. We gave it to this guy. Well, we never got the car back. So when we called the garage, they said, well, no, this kid doesn't work. He used to work here, but we fired him. But he was still hanging out there and said he worked there, so he had our car. So we called the cops. We called the police, and we said, well, help me find my car. So the Stroudsburg police in Pennsylvania, this little cop, he came out and he said he was going to help look for the car, but he said that the car was on my father's name, I guess because my father was paying the insurance. So he could not start the investigation until he had my father's okay. Well, must have been, there was another flood in Johnstown. Remember the big flood in Johnstown, Pennsylvania? Well, there was another big rain, and there was a big flood in Johnstown, and no one could get through. My family lived near Johnstown, but the telephone lines were down, so nobody could get through to my dad for him to give the okay to find the car. So we lost about 3 days. We lost about 3 days of investigation. So the cop, I don't know. I mean, he must have thought my sister and I were Lulu. I mean, he's like, well, why did you give the kid your car? So who knows? So the cop, we were all, we were very emotional. And the cop said, let me tell you, he said, don't look to get your car back because we're close to the New Jersey, New York line. He said, if that car crosses state line, it's lost. So we gave up so we said, well, we lost our $25 car. So one morning I got up and where they had the work, we were at one end of the resort, and I was crossing the baseball field in the morning to go to the coffee shop to get my coffee, and there goes my car on the road. So I ran into the security at the resort, and I said, my car is, go get my car. Well, this security guard at the resort, he wasn't a cop, he was a security guard, and he went and he got my car for me, and he was so proud of himself because he said, he got my car back, and he thought, he was acting like he was a cop. So I called the cop and I said, we got the car back, and he said, okay, stay right there, I'll come over. So whenever he saw my car, he said, you mean, it was, it wasn't a car that was in great shape. And he said, do you mean to tell me you had me and my men looking for this car? He said, you would have been better off to get the insurance money. And I told him, I said, whatever you do, don't touch that back window. Well, then he walked over to the car and he touched the back window, and the back window fell out. But anyway, I went back so I guess he wanted to know, he knew my sister had a criminology degree, and he knew we wanted to be cops. So we went back to Western Pennsylvania. I bought a new car. It was my first car that I bought. I bought it August 16th on my birthday. It must have, and Elvis Presley died that day. August, the day that I bought my first car. Elvis Presley died, and the cop called for whatever reasons. So he said, well, he called from Eastern Pennsylvania. He had my parents. So he said, so what are you girls up to, or what are you going to do? And he said, the police academy isn't going to open up. I mean, it's like 5 years down the line. You're lucky if it's going to open up. And we said, well, I don't know. What are we going to do? So he said, go to the FBI. He said, go to the FBI field office and get into. He said, go and apply for the FBI. He said, they're letting female agents in. It's a big, so that's how I got down to DC, based on a stolen car.
Wow. Isn't that something, ladies and gentlemen?
And when I went to the FBI, the pay was so bad. I didn't have the eyesight to be a FBI agent. I guess it's one of the lowest requirements. That it's like one of the lowest eye requirements, because a FBI agent, they're not a target. They don't make arrests in uniforms. Well, I was working with a girl whose husband worked for Army Intelligence, and she said, forget about this pay. She went over to Army Intelligence to work with her husband. She got a pay raise as a secretary. Well, she called me up a few days later, and she said, hey, Angela, come apply for Army Intelligence is looking for people with political science degrees. They need interns to, get them to, bring them into the system and train them and move them up the system. So she said, you should apply. She said, you'll be making more money than what you're making at the FBI. So I applied to Army Intelligence and received this internship. Now, what I was doing with Army, God only knows, because I was in school during this was after the Vietnam. This was sort of like when people kind of were disgusted with, what I was doing with Army military, I have no idea. But I got through it. After 2 or 3 years, I kind of got, it was just hard, because it was just a different type of atmosphere than what I was used to. I was in school, and it was kind of like, I would take classes where you could kind of do your own thing. I had one class where I had to show up the first day. He told you, go out to the community, do a project, show up the last day with the paper. I was used to more or less. So it was hard to be in a real structured environment.
Unbelievable.
And I knew nothing. And they put me in, of all things, Dale. Now, here I'm a generalist. I'm a historian. I've got a history background, political science. They put me in telemetry, like signals intelligence. And my first job was understanding telemetry and how it works. Well, that to me, what it meant, I was so bored. I had no idea what I was doing. They were sending me to NSA for some classes, which was okay, but they put me with telemetry for 9 months. I knew nothing going in. I knew nothing coming out. And then it got a little bit better.
Yeah, see, Angela, that was one of the things I worked on with the Martin Company, was the telemetry, and then later on analyzing Soviet telemetry from the missile test. So maybe I should have taken those courses that you took.
The classes were I'm a historian. I did history, political science, but then after a while, they put me into Hispanic. I guess because I'm Italian, I looked Hispanic. So they would always give me like Central or South America. So I did that. And then I went up to Congress to work for a while. And I knew that Central America was getting pretty bad. So I came back, and they made me a head of Central American affairs for Army Intelligence, which I liked. And everybody kind of, of course, the military, they wanted Russia, they wanted China, they wanted the big missiles and everything. Well, that's whenever the first Bush was president, and he allowed the military to start aiding in the drug interdiction. This was during the first President Bush. Well, then all of a sudden I had drug interdiction. And I'll tell you, that was very exciting. And then everybody who kind of said, oh, yeah, Central America, small potatoes, it became very interesting with the drugs. But at the time I did Central America, it was a hotbed. You had the Sandinista regime in Nicaragua. You had the insurgency in El Salvador and Honduras. You had who was the Panamanian general Noria. It was, yeah. So by that time I was okay, but it took me 2 to 3 years to just kind of find. I said, if I ever did anything bad in this life or in a past life, and I had karma to pay, it was those first 2 or 3 years I was with Army intelligence. Oh yeah, it was awful. It was bad. It was bad. It was just hard being in the military environment. My family. A lot of military people, their families go into military. So a lot of times I was working with a woman whose father was in the military and the mother was working someplace else. So there was this whole military thing going on, which was a little difficult for me.
Oh, I get it. Mother was very, very strict and had a regime and regimen on everything. I mean, get up at a certain time, unload the canoes. I mean, my dad had like 3 businesses at the same time, and then he was doing the dowsing stuff, and then I would go with him every once in a while out to Fort Meade or out to Arlington. I can't remember the name of the place, but in Arlington for some of his dowsing work, and he would introduce me to people after I'd been sitting in the car for hours, and he goes, oh, this is Colonel McMonigal, or this is Colonel so-and-so, and I'm sitting here thinking, oh my God, this is crazy stuff. He just got lucky and fell into the things he fell into. But he continued being confidential about most of the work he did. I mean, we know my siblings and I know some of the work he did only because of Dr. Scott Jones, or whoever else called him. I don't even know his contact. Most of his diaries disappeared with contact information. Before the end of his time when he could do some work, he did some work for some foreign governments, which was very impressive. And he went overseas with a colonel friend of his to locate booby traps and tunnels with the dowsing. And so that was totally category, not really scientific, mostly let's go locate the tunnels, let's go locate the booby traps, the bombs, let's go find if any terrorists, that kind of thing. And they called me to do some work. I should have called you then, Angela, but actually I didn't know you at that point. We met via an author. So at that point I was doing some miscellaneous work with another country, and they asked me to locate a missing soldier because my specialty was missing. So yeah, you get sent all over the place with what you're doing. It's definitely fascinating.
I met very unique people. I mean, I think because of this type of work, I think I met very interesting people. Don't you, Dale?
No, absolutely.
I mean, when you think without this field, and if I would have stayed in government as long as I did for over 32 years, I would have been crazy or bored out of my mind. This keeps you going at every turn. You just meet interesting people. People have a story to tell. Don't they?
Definitely different project.
Yeah, it's certainly more personal oriented than it is doing a technology task day after day. So I have to admit.
Oh yeah. Grizzly here, he does all sorts of fun stuff in the paranormal. Well, he gets to interview psychics and find out the level of capability, and then
it's just mind blowing. It really is, just to see everybody's abilities at work. It's so interesting, like Ginette, and that's how Ginette and I met, and to see how Ginette works and her success rate and everything, and then Angela, and then Dale. I mean, ladies and gentlemen, Angela Ford and Dale Graff, the gentleman that named the program Stargate. I mean, come on.
Bill is like one of the. He's one of the founding fathers.
Right.
If not, I mean, you were there. I mean, he founded. He did it. Because of him, I was able to do what I did because he laid the foundation for me to come in and do what I did.
Wow,
Unbelievable.
That's almost like stealing your car, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, I tell you what, we really greatly appreciate y'all having the show, and we'd love to have you back at any time. We really wouldn't. You know, it's been an honor. Ain't that right, Ginette?
Oh yeah. Okay. I don't know how to formulate my questions because I have so many questions. So Dale, we will have you back. And were there any questions out of the chat room? Did Doris have a question?
No, I think right now everybody was answering all the questions as they were going, so it was awesome.
I think people
really was
probably stunned at the amazing approach to all this, and I'm really glad it was done. Go ahead. We're going to wrap up.
Really, this is really fine. Yeah, great. Thank you, Grizzly, for.
Oh, absolutely, Dale. It's our honor. You know, I mean, when Angela Ford told me that she was bringing you on the show, I told Ginette, I was like, "Are you serious?" I'm like, "There's no way," you know, because we hear about Stargate in my realm almost every day that we talk.
You're looking at the guy who did it, and he laid the foundation for the program back in the 70s. Dale, a long time ago, did you used to remember there was a guy who wrote a book, and he was working with a guy who was flying an airplane over the Arctic, and they would send messages to each other?
Yeah, Harold Sherman.
Yeah, now how did you know Harold Sherman? Now listen to this.
Okay, now that was another interesting synchronicity. On the first trip I took to Stanford Research Institute when I became the contract manager in June of 1976. Okay, my plans were to meet Hal, Russ, and Ingo and Helen, and just simply have hello, here I am. Let's get going with the new contract, and maybe look at a demonstration. But on that particular day, out of the entire year, he had a visitor that popped in, this visitor would come in maybe every other year, and that visitor was Harold Sherman. So now here all of a sudden, here's Harold Sherman. I said, my God, I can't believe Harold Sherman is here. Now, the reason I get so excited on this was 3 years earlier, I was instrumental in helping Drexel University in Philadelphia set up a honorary session, a day session, and an award for Ed Mitchell. So Ed came in, he did the talk. It was part of Engineering Achievement Week. It was kind of an award that the school gives out every year. So I met Ed Mitchell, and I happened to sit next to him at the luncheon, and we got to talking, and somehow we got into the field of ESP because he did that ESP experiment for space. And I said, by the way, he said, looking at me, he said, if you really want to read a really interesting book, read Thoughts Through Space, written by Sherman and Wilkins, about the experiment, the tracking experiment when Sherman was in New York City and Wilkins was flying around in the Arctic, up at Barrow and parts of Alaska. And he said that was really a fascinating experiment of ESP and across distances and included precognition and that kind of thing. So I read the book a little later, and I said, this is it. I've got to get to meet Harold Sherman and just talk to him. So when I bumped into him, literally bumped into him at SRI, oh, here he is, the guy I want to talk to. And what I had in mind then was to have him repeat that a part of that experiment, even though it was not under dire conditions like he did in the winter of 36, 37. I was I had arranged for a canoe trip into the Arctic that summer. A 400-mile trip because I'm a whitewater canoeist, and I travel a lot of miles in the Arctic tundra on wild rivers in the northern Canada, going into the Arctic Ocean and James Bay and Hudson's Bay. So I said to Harold, I really like your book. I like your experiment. How would you like to go back and do another tracking experiment with me and my crew on the Coppermine River. And he was so happy. He said, "Yeah, I'd like to do that. I want to go back to the Arctic."
Wow.
In his mind, So here he is, and my trip in the river was only a month later, so I was able to get all this together and all the arrangements. And so Harold in Little Rock, Arkansas, arranged like he did with Wilkins. Every 3 days or so, he would try to tune in on my situation and the canoe group's progress as we traveled for about 2.5 weeks on this remote river in the Arctic. And he had this recorded. He had sent it to Hal Putoff, who witnessed and had it notarized. And so he did that. He tracked us. Later, when I saw the data and we did the evaluation, there were some really unique aspects to what he said that correlated with our trip. Now, it wasn't as varied as Wilkins, but there was enough in there to really convince me and others who looked at the data. He really did replicate in principle, and in some cases, exactly the kind of thing that he did with Wilkins 40 years earlier. So that was how I got to know Harold, and we became good friends after that.
Well,
we made in contact.
Well, whenever I was either in high school or college, I had read the Harold Sherman book and the experiments that he did with the guy going over the Arctic and doing. So whenever I met Dale at Fort Meade, Dale had come in one day and we were just talking. And actually I was with the program for quite a while. So it wasn't, Dale would come in and we would talk. And when Dale told me, he said, "Oh yeah, he knew Harold Sherman and did experiments with him." It blew my mind because I was like, I said, I can't believe it. I remember reading that book. I was young. I can't remember if I was in college or high school, but it was a break where you had time to read or to do something different. And when Dale told me that, I was like, I said, I can't believe I met him. That Dale did this with Harold Sherman because I loved Harold Sherman and what he did. And that to me was synchronicity. There was
absolutely.
I was like, oh my God, you're kidding me. And
yeah.
Like, oh yeah, I know Harold, and I did experiments with him.
Wow!
And I'm like, are you kidding me? So to me, it just, I could never. That was like it just hit me like a bolt of lightning. Like, I can't believe it.
Well, I hate to tell you folks, it's the end of the night, and poor Grizzly has more shows on his plate tonight.
Okay.
So hopefully we can have you two back, and we can talk about. I met Ingo, so maybe we can talk about Ingo. I met Russell Targ, and maybe hear some other stories you have.
Yeah, absolutely. We'd love to have you back. Ladies and gentlemen, Angela Ford and Dale Graff on tonight's show. What an honor. Unbelievable. Thank you, Mr. Graff, for being on our show.
All right, great.
Y'all have a good night. Thank you. Take care. We'll see you soon. All right. Bye-bye. Ginette, I cannot believe that. I mean, this is unbelievable.
Police, fire, and
unbelievable. What a show.
Yeah, there's some great people out there. Thank you for having me tonight. Good talking to you.
Absolutely. Take care, Ginette, and we'll see you next Friday at 6:00 p.m. Eastern Time. Ladies and gentlemen, it's that time of the night. We must say goodbye. From coast to coast and around the world. Until next time, ladies and gentlemen. We'll see you. Good night. Thank you for watching and tuning in.